Good morning. You guys are going to be watching a video on the Congress of Vienna, its aftermath, and then the revolutions that came out of the conservatism that was predominant during the 19th century. So, got Congress of Vienna, conservatism, Metternich, revolution, liberals, nationalists, who else? Oh, socialists, all get together. Then they fight a little. Then the conservatives give the liberals what they want, and revolution falls apart. So workers lose. It's kind of the theme of history, isn't it? Workers lose. So enjoy. It's not short, but again, it's done in the in-class style, so I'm not reading off of something, so make mistakes sometimes, mispronounce words, but I usually fix them. Anyway, enjoy yourself. Bye.
AP European students. Today we're going to be looking at the 19th century, 1800s, early 19th century, and the beginnings of the revolutions that would take over Europe in the 1800s. The first in 1830. Well, there was some in 1820, and then 1830, and then 1848. So we're going to look at those just to kind of give you a little preview. You know that the revolutions in Latin America, for the most part, were successful towards independence. The ones in Europe during this time period are not going to be. So these revolutions, though, were the key to the start of the First World War, which would happen some 60 years later. So we need to take some time to understand the social and political nature of the time period. So just a review of the Congress of Vienna, which occurred from 1814 to 1815. You have the Quadruple Alliance that works together: Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Great Britain. There is a representative from France, and the point of the Congress of Vienna is to balance power, to make sure no one country is more powerful than the other. There, France is fined and does get property taken away, but comparatively speaking, the retaliation is not that great. France is pretty much put back to its borders prior to the beginning of the French Revolution, back to 1790. So not too much retaliation in this Congress. The goal, again, by Metternich and some of the other leaders, was to balance power. So you want to strengthen France's enemies, but you don't want to weaken France so much that she becomes desperate. So this is just a political cartoon of the time period. It is titled The Political Balance, and you have the British on the left with money being balanced out with the other countries on the right, including the French and the Russians and the Prussians and Austria, represented by Metternich in the blue coat in the middle. And they're taking property from the French, and there's some negotiations occurring. So again, trying to figure out what's the perfect balance of power. So this is a map of Europe in 1815, and you can see that they create the German Confederation, which is in the middle, which mimics some of the previous Holy Roman Empire, but it has changed a little bit. You've got Switzerland and the Italian states separated out now, and you have the Austrian Empire represented both within, again, the German Confederation, and also outside. But you can obviously see the main powers here are Russia, Prussia, Austria, and France. And the other ones are kind of off to the side. So the main objectives of the Congress of Vienna is to pretty much undo everything that Napoleon had done. So reduce France to its old boundaries. Her frontiers are going to be pushed back to the 1790 level, and to restore as many old monarchies as possible so that they have legitimacy. So they're going to put back onto the throne the old families, if it's the Bourbons or any old family that are related to the previous rulers, so that people would find them legitimate and support them. This new idea coming out of 1815 was also the idea that maybe war wasn't good anymore, that maybe peace was ideal. And this again is related to the Industrial Revolution and trade, and finding that there's other ways to gain prosperity for your country rather than just taking over other countries and taking their spoils. So the key players, and I know it's a little hard to see, I'm sorry, the key players at Vienna, at the Congress of Vienna, would be the host, which is the Prince Clemens von Metternich, which is the representative from Austria. Then you have the foreign minister Castlereagh from Britain, and you have King Frederick William III of Prussia, Tsar Alexander I of Russia, and the last would be the foreign minister from France, whose name was Talleyrand. So those are the main powers that were working together to come up with a deal. And again, the principles that they established that will go forward from this point, and they'll be attempting to institute these principles throughout the 1800s, specifically Metternich will. He wants a balance of power, so they want no one country to be too powerful. They want the leaders to be legitimate, to have legitimacy, and to be supported. And they are looking for compensation for all the wars they fought against France and all of the bounty that was taken from them by Napoleon. So the coalition forces are going to occupy France for between 3 and 5 years, depending on which country you're talking about. In France, it will have to pay reparations or an indemnity of 700 million francs. So again, they're paying it back, but they took a lot during this time period as well. So what are some of the changes made? And there's a lot that are going to be listed here. I don't want to go into too much details, but just be aware of what's happening to France and who's gaining by it. So Russia's given some of Poland. Poland gets given around a lot. Prussia is also going to get parts of Poland, but also Saxony and some of the other German territories, so to enlarge in Prussia and strengthen it. They will set up the German Confederation, which will actually be a compilation of 39 states under Austrian rule, which again, Metternich was the head of the Congress of Vienna. He kind of ran the show, so he got Austria in charge of the German Confederation. However, Prussia is later going to think that they should be in charge. Austria's given back territory it had lost recently, plus more in some of the German states, and it's given Italy. So Austria is a real big winner here. And then the House of Orange, and if you remember that Orange from the William and Mary of Orange, you're talking about the Dutch Republic and the Austrian Netherlands are going to be ruled by the House of Orange again. Norway and Sweden are going to be joined during this time period. Switzerland is going to be guaranteed its neutrality. Hanover is going to be enlarged and made a kingdom. Again, this is in the German Confederation. Britain was given Cape Colony in South Africa and some of the other colonies in Africa and Asia that had been previously controlled by France. Sardinia was given Piedmont, Nice, and Savoy, and Genoa. So again, you have some breakups in the Italian area there. And the Bourbon Ferdinand I was restored to the two Sicilies. So you have a Bourbon leader coming in charge of Sicily. And the Duchy of Parma was given to Marie Louise. The slave trade, which is interesting during the Congress of Vienna, is going to be condemned at the British, by the British. So again, slavery becomes an issue during this time period. And then there's the freedom of navigation for many of the rivers. And then last but not least, the freedom of navigation was guaranteed for many rivers in Europe, which again is supporting the Industrial Revolution and this idea that increased trade and connection between countries is better than being adversaries. So let's get into a little bit that's coming out of the 19th century thought. What are the groups of people that are, and groups of ideas that are vying for power during this time? You have the conservatives, which are represented essentially by the Congress of Vienna and by Metternich and his ideas. And he wants to go back to really a time period almost of the ancien regime or the ancient regime, time period previous to 1789. Restore royal families, go back to the social hierarchy. The church is going to often support this viewpoint. Welcome to first period. Now you know when I'm recording. The church is going to go back to this viewpoint. Examples of conservatism during this time period and movements towards them would be the Carlsbad Decrees and then the Peterloo Massacre and the 6 Acts that came out in Britain in 1819. So Carlsbad Decrees were by Metternich, and the Peterloo Massacre and the 6 Acts were in England. So conservatives, essentially, let's go back to the time period before everything got crazy with these Republican ideals. Then you have the liberals. The liberals, again, are not the U.S. Democrats. This is very similar to the information I gave you in the Romanticism lecture, so I'm going to just really quickly review it. Classical liberalism, what do they want? They want a written constitution. They want separation of powers. They want to get rid of divine right monarchies. They want some sort of republican form of government. They want to protect basic rights. They want male property owners to have the right to vote, and they support laissez-faire free trade. So they want to get rid of tariffs and all those kind of things that a lot of the older conservative landowners have used to prop up their wealth, essentially saying that you can't bring in outside food, and so then therefore they can sell their own for more. So they want those things. Now there's other groups that are coming out during this time period, and I want to make sure that you understand that this next group, the nationalists, you could be a nationalist and be conservative and be liberal. So nationalism is essentially what binds these people together. You could also be a nationalist a little bit and be a socialist, even though Marx would say that you should have all the workers come together, not necessarily by nation. So let's go over what is a nationalist. Well, Herder, who is German, is going to come up with this idea that each person has their own genius. And when I say person or people, I mean group of people. That people, because of their ethnicity, are different, and they have their own genius, and that genius should be supported and embraced. And so he is a nationalist who wants people who speak the same language and all those things to come together. So where does nationalism come from? Well, the Industrial Revolution is going to lead to a need for communication and trade, and so it helps if people speak the same language. There's also a need with the alienation that occurs because of the Industrial Revolution for family or society to come together, because people feel out of sorts in this new life that they're living, where things are going really fast and they're not living in the countryside anymore with people that are familiar to them, but they're living surrounded by strangers. So how do all these strangers come together? Well, if they speak a common language and they have similar beliefs, then they become this nation. So the Congress of Vienna, the one problem with it is it put people of different nationalities together in order to balance power. So what you're going to find is a lot of the battles during the 1800s, and what will lead into actually World War I, is this idea that ethnic groups want to have different countries, want to have their own states. They don't want to be put together, and that's still an issue even today. So it's going to lead to conflict. So those are the nationalists. The socialists come from a little bit of a different perspective. They believe, again, that the Industrial Revolution has had some negative consequences. They believe that it has created a selfish and individualistic society, and that there also needs to be a focus on community. But socialists see the community as being essentially the people who need to come together to get help are the people who are the workers. So they want to plan the economy to help the poor. They want private property. Some people want it to be regulated. That would be the more moderate socialists. Others would want it abolished, and that would be more of the Marxian socialists who feel like there needs to be violent revolution or community or state ownership of property. But again, socialists are trying to fix the ills of the Industrial Revolution and the things, how society is kind of broken down because of it. So then you also have economic responses during this time period. So we've gone through political. Socialism kind of was in the middle there. It was a political and economic response. And then there's just what are the economists saying about what's going on? And you've read about Thomas Malthus. He believes that the population is going to outstrip food supply, making conditions of the working class worse. And there's not much you can do about that, nor should you do much about that. I don't think he really supports that. You do much about it. He essentially says that it'll work itself out. David Ricardo, he did the principles of political economy. He went with the iron law of wages and essentially saw that there was a vicious cycle. If you raise wages, population will increase because people will have more children, which will then drive wages down. So essentially, he was talking or speaking against the idea of a minimum wage because he's saying the wages are what they should be based on the amount of people in the population, and lower wages kind of regulates the population. Then you have people like Jeremy Bentham, who's going to be one of these people called utilitarianism or utilitarianists. He believed that the greatest happiness should be for the greatest amount of people. So this kind of idea that almost like the majority rules, and so society should be serving the greatest number of people, which is a modern idea versus society that would serve the rich. Poor laws, he supported them. The idea was to help the poor, but I think what happened was it really made it so the poor became punished for their poverty. So it set out to make poverty the least desirable of all social situations, put people in workhouses, separated families, but the idea was to take care of the poor, but it was an interesting way of taking care of them. The other thing that was supported oftentimes was this repeal of corn laws. Now, the corn laws were a tariff on corn and grains that made it so that you couldn't bring in cheaper grains from outside Britain, that you had to buy the British grain first. And the only time that outside grain could come in is if the price of grain got to a level that it's never really gotten to. So there was really no way, if for some reason there was low grain or not a lot of grain produced one year and it became very expensive and people were starving to death, there was no way to bring in grain from another area of the world because of these tariffs. So who's benefiting? Not the greatest number of people. There's a small group of landowners who are benefiting from the corn laws. So utilitarianists are going to be against the corn laws, as are the liberals, because they are against tariffs. And so really the only people supporting them are the conservatives, who rule England again, and that's where these were going on. So then you also have a response by utopian socialists, who are going to advocate for the creation of ideal communities. That's where you get the idea of utopianism. They are going to question capitalism, just this whole idea of working for a wage and whether or not that is the best way to do things. You have Robert Owen, who thought that you could have a humane and good industrial working environment and also make a profit. So he envisioned factories or communities where people worked together and lived in harmony. He actually set up he started out in England and then would later move to the United States and found New Harmony, which was a utopian society, but it's going to fall apart. They all seem to. He actually tried to introduce currency based on time, so you get a pay or a bill based on how many hours of labor you had, and you can see one down here. So that means that it was time spent laboring, not necessarily the skill at which you labored. So that means a doctor would be making the same amount as a person shoveling dung. Again, equality. People started to fight, though, maybe over how much they were working within their hour of labor. So that became an issue, but there was always this idea out that maybe you could have a better society if we could just create this perfect society. Maybe everything would be better. Charles Fourier is also going to be one of these utopian socialists, and he is going to advocate for the construction of these phalanxes, which are agrarian communities, agrarian meaning farming communities, where people did different tasks every day so they didn't get bored. So he's trying to get rid of the repetitive nature of the industrial worker. He also was considered used the word feminism for the first time, and also thought that they should get rid of marriage because essentially women were being bought and sold. And so he was a free love guy, so just so you know. Then you have anarchists. These guys are anarchists, maybe socialists too. So you've got Blank here. He rejected both industry and dominance of government. He's going to call for the violent overthrow of capitalism. I don't know if you want to call him an anarchist or a socialist, but definitely on the extreme end. And then you've got Proudhon, who advocated for peaceful working together of small businesses and people where they would cooperate and exchange goods based on mutual understanding of, hey, your labor is valuable and I do something valuable too, so let's just share. Instead of having a government tell us to do these things. So again, kind of anarchists getting away from government control. Then you have Karl Marx and his what will become communism, but he talked about it and called it socialism. He believed that class conflict, and he believed it needed to be violent, would eventually lead to an overthrow of the bourgeoisie, who was again the man, who was the employer, and it will become known as Marxism. He's going to work together with Frederick Engels, who wrote The Conditions of the Working Class in England, and essentially presented a very devastating picture of working conditions. They're going to come together, they're going to write the Communist Manifesto, they're going to call for radical socialism, the outright abolition of private property, not just redistribution. So everything will be owned by the public. So thoughts are going to lead to actions, and you're going to start to have revolutions. So I'm going to just stop right here, give you a little bit of a break, and then we'll get back to talking about the revolutions that come out of these ideas. So with all the new ideas and the conservatism that's dominating Europe in the 1800s, people start to want change. They were kind of promised these constitutional monarchs, at least that's what they felt like they were getting after these revolutions. They had experienced, when I say these revolutions, I mean what happened with the French Revolution. They had experienced a little bit of what it meant to have some change when Napoleon took over. And so a lot of these countries, specifically France, wants to go back to having more of a say in government. So there's something called the July Revolution, or the Revolution of 1830. They're the same thing. This revolution occurred in July 27th to 29th in 1830, and it overthrew the Bourbon monarchy of Charles X. Now, the Bourbon monarchy of Charles X was set up by the Congress of Vienna after Napoleon lost power, and Charles X is the grandson of Louis XV, just to give you an idea, but he is also the brother of Louis XVIII, who was put in charge of France after Napoleon lost power. So Louis XVIII dies, and now you have somebody named Charles X, and people don't like him. Also, you have this thing where now you've got a hereditary ruler, this family, this guy's taken over just because he's the next closest relative. And people are not liking that. So what happens with this revolution is essentially they go from a hereditary monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. And they choose their leader, his name is Louis Philippe, from a different house or different family in France, he's nobility still, but the people chose him. He was not next in line for the throne. It's actually going to shift families. So you go and you see it here down at the bottom that Charles X is going to end the Bourbon rule because he will get overthrown. And the House of Bourbon that was based on hereditary right is going to go away. And now you're going to have what they call July monarchy. The family is the House of Orleans, and it's based on popular sovereignty or the will of the people. And so your new leader is Louis Philippe. So Louis Philippe rules. Louis Philippe, when he comes to power, promises a constitutional monarchy. But for whatever reason, power corrupts completely, and you always get this return to these leaders trying to be divine right kings and trying to do whatever they want without giving any rights to the people. So in 1848, after 18 years of rule, Louis Philippe is going to be replaced, and they're going to remove him, the French people, from power, and they're going to establish something called the Second Republic. Again, it's supposed to be a republic, so they feel like they've got this republic. They call up another leader who they think has popular support. They call up Napoleon III. I know, it's as if they can only have certain people. Napoleon III, who, yes, was related to Napoleon. And they are going to place him in power. So what was the Second Republic about? Well, it's established during what's called the February Days, and the goal was that with this new republic, they were going to have universal suffrage and unemployment relief because the economy was pretty bad. One of the things that precipitated these 1848 revolutions was famine throughout Europe because of a bad growing season. It's very disorganized, this revolution is. The middle class liberals want moderate political reforms. See, they're not going to support universal suffrage, and the socialists want far-reaching reforms, and so the middle class gets really scared of these socialists. And so eventually the middle class is going to kind of give up on these ideas of increased suffrage and in order to secure themselves and their property. So the June days occur. So they've got this republic going, and they need to bring in Napoleon, and so there's lots of arguments in the leadership. So the June days is an uprising again that occurs where the executive commission is going to take the workshops that were initially opened up to give unemployment relief, and they're going to shut them down because they think that they're not working. The workers are going to take to the streets, and they're going to cry again the French motto, bread. This one they added or lead, meaning either give us food or we're going to kill you. 1,500 people are going to be killed during this uprising in France, but the government's going to crush the rebellion, mostly because the middle class gets out of this revolution. The middle class says, never mind, we don't support it anymore, we're going to support the government because you guys are going crazy. So by the end of 1848, the National Assembly is going to issue a constitution for the Second Republic. They have one strong president. They have one House legislature with all adult male suffrage. They're going to have 9 million Frenchmen who could vote, whereas only 200,000 could be for. That's what they set up. That's not necessarily what happens. So Louis Napoleon comes in, Napoleon III, and he is going to appeal to the conservatives. He's going to appeal to the bourgeoisie. And he will, because they like his name, they like Napoleon, it reminds them of the good old days. He's going to attempt to attract the working class by presenting himself as caring about social issues and poverty. But you know, he's a politician, if nothing else. And so once in office, he is going to end the Second Republic, and he's going to create the Second Empire, and he's going to establish himself as Emperor Napoleon III. Surprise, surprise, surprise. So the people were fooled by Napoleon. I think that's happened before. So why did the revolutions occur in France in 1830 and 1848? Well, here's the main chart for you. Charles X was a strong believer in absolutism, and no one likes that. So he suspended legislature and limited vote and restricted press, did all those things that people hate. And so the liberals and the radical socialists rebelled and took to the streets in Paris. The moderate liberals are going to put in place a constitutional monarchy and choose Louis Philippe as king. He goes pretty well for a while until he starts to do the same things. The government's going to try to silence critics, prevent public meetings, all those things that kind of Charles X was asserting. And the result is that people are going to be upset. Louis Philippe's going to go fine and just leave. So revolutionary leaders are then going to proclaim a second republic, which is going to fail because the middle class abandons it and would rather have a strong leader that's going to control the masses than actually have true change. So this is just an example of, this is by Henry Daumier. It's a etching that was created and put in newspapers to show what the government was doing to the people. So again, to kind of support the revolutions during this time period, and it just shows a family that essentially was killed in their sleep. Got the old man, notice the old man over in the right corner, and then the baby underneath, and you can tell there's a woman here. So just kind of stirring up anger against the government. So after the 1848 revolution, France is going to end up pretty much after, like the same as it did after the 1789 revolution. Conservatives are in charge. Louis Napoleon, or Napoleon III, Bonaparte's nephew, is elected president, but he's going to dissolve the assembly and create this, in the Second Republic, create the Second Empire, and he's going to be a dictator. So there's some more revolutions that are going to occur. One's in Austria in 1848, and same format. urban workers, middle class liberals, peasants, students, everybody are going to get together and they're going to rebel. So the Austrian Empire is made up of lots of different ethnic groups. And so in Hungary, which is part of the Austrian Empire in 1848, they have nationalist sentiment and they want to have national autonomy. They also want these liberal ideas of civil liberties and even maybe a little bit more socialistic of universal suffrage. So you've got liberals, you've got socialists, and you've got nationalists all getting together to fight against the conservative control of the Habsburg family. So you've got Hungary revolting in 1848, you've got Vienna in Austria revolting in the same year. They're all going up against Emperor Ferdinand I and against Metternich and his ideas, because again, Metternich was from Austria. The monarchy, in response to this and trying to save itself, is going to abolish serfdom. The former serfs then become satisfied, so they don't feel like they need to fight anymore. Therefore, the aristocracy is going to come back, and the middle class is going to start to support the government, and so the revolution is going to fall apart on class lines. Essentially, the middle class, upper middle class side with the government and with the king, and the lower classes are happy enough that they don't feel like they need to fight anymore. So Francis Joseph is actually going to be crowned emperor, and Russia is going to help the Austrian Empire to control Hungary. And then Austria is able to control Hungary and rule it as a conquered territory because Hungary doesn't get back in line. So whereas Vienna and Austria, their revolts are controlled, Hungary, which is controlled by Austria, is not as easily quelled. They don't as easily get back in line. So Russia's going to help Austria to conquer Hungary, and then Austria is going to actually have to rule it with an iron fist. Again, that's going to not help them when they decide to fight in World War I later in the next century. Prussia, same type of situation and essentially similar response. Liberals want a constitutional monarchy. Prussia would like to lead the 38-state German Confederation instead of Austria, so there's some power plays going on. So in Berlin, in March of 1848, Frederick William IV, who is King of Prussia, is going to give in to workers and some of their demands in order to maintain his power. Because again, a revolution is going on. So while the middle class is somewhat satisfied because they feel like they've gotten some of their goals reached, the workers are not. So the democratic and socialist demands were not met, even though some of the demands having to do with trade and that kind of thing were met. So the middle class is going to abandon the revolution. One of the other things that's going on is Germany kind of did a thing, it's a little bit of a trickery, where they said, okay, we're having a problem with ruling this country. Let's focus the whole country on a common enemy, and that was Denmark. And there was some confliction, or not, that's the wrong word. There was some conflict over territory, and so all of Prussians kind of came together to go against Denmark, and that helped to keep the rebellion down. So the middle class supports nationalism over their idea of having voting rights and that kind of thing. And they also are at war, so it's really hard to have an internal revolution and also have a war. So Frederick William, who again is the king, the people of Prussia try to give him the crown and make him king again, and he says, no, 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 I'm not going to accept the crown from the gutter, saying essentially, I put myself in charge, God puts me in charge, you don't put me in charge. So Frederick, what did he really want? He wanted to be emperor of a united Germany, and he wanted Austria out. But Austria during this time period is going to say no, and they're going to go back and forth, and eventually there's going to be a war between the two countries, and Prussia's going to win. So just a quick map shows you the 1830 revolutions in red, so you can see where those were, and then the 1848 revolutions in purple. You can see them throughout, and there's a whole bunch of them going on in Italy as well. You can also see that Greece had their revolution, which I mentioned in the Romanticism video, it started actually in the 1820s, but they're going to get their independence in the 1830s. So they were rebelling, but they were all rebelling against the Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. So of course the rest of Europe was supporting of that. And then the blue lines are where the revolutions were repressed from. So essentially all of Europe coming together to put these revolutions down. So why did the revolutions in 1848 fail to end the monarchies? The majority of the reason is because the middle class did not support the peasants, because the peasants' demands were too extreme. They weren't ready for them. So subtle changes were, specifically economic concessions were given, and voting rights to the middle class. It got the middle class out of the revolution. They take their support away, and they turn on the poor, and the result is that the poor were essentially the victims from 1848. They're the ones that were used to fight the revolution and then turned on immediately when the middle class got what they wanted. Slowly, though, because the middle class got the right to vote, some changes are going to be coming. But again, they're slow. Unions were also going to start to be permitted during this time period to help workers. Strikes oftentimes were outlawed, but the unions were permitted. But again, the fear of communism and the socialist extremes were so strong that conservatives were able to keep their power.